Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ICANN82 readout webinar hosted by auDA. My name is Jordan Carter, and I'm auDA's Policy Director, Internet Governance and Policy Director. And I'm two hats today on this webinar. I'm going to be MC, and I will also be reporting on the ICANN82's proceedings. But before we kick that off, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. Acknowledging this, I also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first people to innovate and use technology on these lands, and to do so over many millennia, knowledge upon which we all build today. As you'll have noticed, the session is being recorded, just saying that by way of disclosure. And our approach is to give each of our speakers sort of 4 or 5 minutes to give a readout of ICANN82 highlights from their perspectives. And we've got people speaking from 5 of the supporting organizations and advisory committees of the ICANN environment. We've got people from the at-large community, people from the generic names supporting organization, from the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, from the Government Advisory Committee, and from the CCNSO. And today, after a heated discussion between your panelists before we kicked off and welcomed you all in, we are going to start with Cheryl Langdonor. Cheryl, over to you.
Thank you, Jordan. Yes, I won the arm wrestling competition. Cheryl Langdonor, and I'm from the at-large community. And of course, many of you know the term ALAC, which is the At-Large Advisory Committee. And that's the 15-person elected and selected group of people who represent the interests of end users as an advisory committee within the ICANN structure. So you'll often hear people use ALAC and at-large almost interchangeably, but it's not. ALAC is the advisory committee, at-large is the rest of us. However, we all had a very busy, as we always do, meeting at ICANN82. Our main focus, if we look at the proportion of the topics of meetings which occurred on each and every day of the ICANN meeting, including the Saturday and the Sunday, very much a focus on the next round of new names, the opportunity for new generic top-level domains, and how we're working on developing things like applicant support for underserved and underrepresented interest groups and communities who may wish to explore the possibility of getting a top-level name, and working on some of the perhaps less sexy and exciting but very, very important things like aspects of contracts and stuff that goes with making the whole program work. So there was a huge amount of time spent in that space. We also spent a quite reasonable amount of time talking about aspects of accountability and transparency and the internal review processes, the mechanisms by which ICANN as an organisation and our part of ICANN, the ALAC and at large, is able to continuously improve its own mechanisms and protocols and processes, and also become part of a wider picture, talking about things which are called holistic reviews, big picture stuff. And I think we progressed that quite well indeed. We did 2 very, very interesting exercises. They were internal plenary sessions, but these sessions were open to the wider ICANN community and very, very well attended. One of them, which was a very healthy conversation about the changing or effects of things like AI and current geopolitical interests and activities on internet core values and where we're heading towards as we see some evolutionary pressures on the internet we've known and loved so far, and where it might be heading in the not too distant future. And the other one was again back in that new name space, where we did a debate, and it was in true form a debate. We had people on the pro and people on the con and the pro, and we talked about the promises that were made after the last round of new names, the things that we were told would occur, so that we felt secure and a very positive and affirmative about a next round going on. And we debated, have those things actually occurred? Or if they've occurred, have they occurred far enough along for us to feel trusted? So I got to play the no on one thing that I've spent, almost 9 years of my life working on in a positive way. And that was a bit of fun, always flipping the ideas. And we also looked at the very important matter again of applicant support and how successful we believed the planning and processes so far on the applicant support program went along there. And I have one final little thing that I wanted to mention to you all, and there's a link that I hope our host will be able to share with you for a little bit of a YouTube video, which did form part of a very exciting conversation that we held in Women in DNS. Now, the DNS Women is not it is an ICANN-wide thing, but it is housed or homed within the at-large community. And we were delighted to, amongst other things, have a conversation with the 94-year-old Jake Feinler. Steve Crocker facilitated that. It's an amazing woman who was undoubtedly one of the great pioneers in the wonderful world of the internet we now get to know and love. And I would recommend looking up YouTube to look at some of the work that's been recently done, capturing her history and her ability to influence not just the women, but everyone in the room, as this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, amazing woman talked to us, and I think could have talked to us all night. But she was terrific, and I just wanted to mention that as well. That's it from me. Thanks, Jordan.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And I forgot to mention before that to the audience, as you think of any questions you'd like to ask people, feel free to pop them on the Q&A pod, and we'll come to them either if they fit in right as we go, or perhaps after the panelists have all shared their initial thoughts. So thanks again, Cheryl. Those open plenaries sound like a good experiment. I'm going to turn now to Desiree Milosevic, bringing us some news from the GNSO. Desiree, over to you.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you for the invitation. And good evening, everyone, or good day in Australia. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so and it's late here, so I'll keep the camera off if it's not a problem. And perhaps just to say, I'm one of the NomCom appointed council members for Contracted Party House, the GNSO. For those who are listening for the first time, may know there's 21 members on the GNSO Council, and the GNSO is the generic name supporting organization that consists of several constituencies, which have different stakeholder groups that are organized in contracted and non-contracted parties house. So we have the contracted parties house with registries and registrars, and whilst the other stakeholder groups, both commercial and non-commercial stakeholders groups, are in non-contracted parties house. So that's how we organize ourselves, mainly for voting purposes. The other thing, what happened, I think, what is important for the ICANN82 meeting we just had in Seattle, it was again a very rich discussion with many, if you like, tales and policy development processes taking place at the same time, and the council had to see how to prioritize their task and how to view the potential view, but also we're trying to, as always, streamline our participation and timing with bilateral meetings. So I'll give a bit of a taste of what the Council discussed, and then what we discussed with the Government Advisory Committee and our joint meeting with the ICANN board. So on the day one session, we really started with the staff who gave a presentation and asked for the feedback from the Council to see about the next revision of the consensus policy implementation framework that the global domains and strategy team members are building. So that was a useful exchange. And then we went into a consent agenda where we adopted the transfer PDP. The transfer working group worked really well and have met the deadline. So it was unanimously voted and adopted by both houses. After that item, which was on the consent agenda, we moved more into the current and next steps and some clarifications and concerns that were raised with regards to three types or topics. One is the registration data accuracy, which is a topic that the GNSO spends a lot of time on, as well as the Government Advisory Committee. These are the ongoing discussions, how to assess and improve registration data accuracy within the ICANN's remit. And due to legal and definitional challenges, various stakeholders groups determine different next steps, but there are some concerns about perceptions of inaction. So the Council is thinking of responding to that as well. We did also note that human rights impact assessment, there is a checklist that has been produced. The Council acknowledged the development of the human rights checklist after the PDP for transfer has been closed. However, suggestion is made to apply this new tool to all other relevant policies and report back to the Council for further action. We did discuss something about billing contact issues and procedural concerns, but this is really a tiny issue that can take a lot of Council's time. It's a procedural discussion which was centered again around and whether billing contact information should continue to be required in domain registration data. And there was a general agreement that this data field is outdated and unnecessary. And there were some concerns made about making policy changes outside the formal processes because this issue came up during the implementation review team. So as you know, GNSO develops policies that are related to GTLDs. And once they are being developed in working groups, they go to the board where they get also adopted, and the implementation review team starts implementing those policies. And some things next week come up from these policies that still need some work on. So that's me telling you a little bit about, the headaches, but the Council was looking at two options, how to change, how to move forward on this. And we looked at, acknowledging the drafting error that might have led to omission of this from the final EPDP report, which was discussing the data policy. Or we could recognize the procedural concerns where we are looking at things whilst they're being, where we allow future policy development to take place and to assess the implementation review team determination. So there was also a third alternative that's been mentioned, and that is a contract amendment, but however, that is outside of the Council's remit because contracts are dealt with contracted parties' house. the ICANN. Couple of other things I'd like to bring here today is that we had a very good meeting with the board. We're looking about the primary. Our goal should be to facilitate and move our work forward efficiently. As you know, in the second week of April, the applicant guidebook will be posted for comments. So we're moving along a huge chunk of work and trying to prioritize. And I think the interesting thing that came out of a discussion with the board is how we need to work with governments to encourage that public policies are created with an understanding and awareness of ICANN policy and the ICANN multi-stakeholder model. We noted that we participants within the ICANN community, we ought to adhere to the multi-stakeholder model ourselves. And we need to respect the outcomes of the multi-stakeholder process and to avoid seeking, venues or different avenues when this desired outcome is not achieved. That is what I think was discussed with the board, and I think with the GAC we also had with the board and the GAC, the council had a trilateral call, which was to do with urgent requests, and which went very well. Again, this work on urgent request timeline and authentication mechanism continues, and there were different processes mentioned and ways how to handle urgent requests and timeline issues and whether there should be a support for this approach. So the GAC and GNSO agreed that implementation review team is the appropriate body to handle urgent request timeline issues. We also noted that the GAC Public Safety Working Group is developing authentication mechanism for urgent law enforcement requests with input from some LEAs. What the council, though, stressed was the need for registrars and registries to be involved in these discussions, and we also encourage broad community participation. I think we had a green light from the GAC to participate. So that work is, of course, very important, and the ICANN board supported this approach of referring the urgent requests back to the IRT. With that, I would say that we, the council also looked at the potential PDP work ahead. On our last mission, the council has set up an informal working group. It's a small group, it's not a working group, it's an informal group on internet governance and the WSIS Plus 20 review, which is updating council when it needs about the relevant other matters that take place outside of ICANN, but also really to work together within the ICANN community. So the informal group reached out to the CCNSO, IGLC co-chairs, as well as the GAC informal group on internet governance as well. Yes,
we're gonna have to wrap it up there, I think. Yeah,
we have to wrap it up. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work on our plate in shorthand with Latin script diacritics PDP timeline being assessed, and happy to answer any questions if you have so with regards to the council.
Thanks, Desiree. Thank you for that comprehensive readout. The GNSO is definitely the busiest policymaking space in the ICANN environment for sure, and I think we got a little bit of a sense of that. So hopefully there'll be some questions that come through as we go. And in fact, there was one question which we'll deal with now, from Holly Raish. And her question, I think, was what role does compliance have, if any, in the issue of data accuracy? Do you want to have a 1 minute answer to that, Desiree?
I think I was muted.
You were,
The
yeah.
the question was what compliance has to do with data accuracy.
Yeah.
If I heard it correctly, well, there is a compliance team, and there's also an informal study, which I had no time to mention. They are looking at this as well. So the progress on data accuracy really needs to progress from the data that we would get from the compliance team as well, and the survey that's been carried out. But it is the quality of data which is, sometimes lacking to assure whether there is a problem with the data accuracy. So we have, so the compliance is definitely has some accountability towards that, and process in place.
Thanks, Desiree. And there you go, Holly. Right, we'll carry on with our panel. Thank you for that update once again. I'm turning now to Ram Mohan, the chair of the Security and Stability Advisory Committee. Ram, go ahead.
Jordan, thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here again with all of you. Good morning to you. The Security and Stability Committee met again at the ICANN meeting in Seattle. This was the fourth time in the last 2 years now that we've met in our new format, which is now our future and permanent format, where all our meetings are open by default. So that was really we got a lot of participation again. And one of the new things that we're also doing is the work that we're doing in our work parties. We're holding those work party meetings also at the ICANN meetings, at least some of them. And those work party meetings are also open. So that gives members of our community a sense of how the SSAC does its work, and to some extent, how the sausage is made. So with that said, let me just speak about two key things that we were focused on and we are focused on. The first is we're deep in the midst of data collection and work on understanding and cataloging the impact of open source software in DNS infrastructure, in critical internet infrastructure. Many governments around the world, many regulators around the world are starting to pay attention to this topic, particularly with keeping in mind supply chain vulnerabilities that may arise. So we're in the midst of putting together a catalog of just what pieces of DNS infrastructure are dependent on open source software, and just to have that baseline assessment. We expect to have that report out most likely before the ICANN84 meeting later this year. And that's received enthusiastic responses. We have reached out and surveyed scores of critical infrastructure providers, asking them for information, and they have been incredibly generous with responding to those questions. So stay tuned on that. The second thing that we're also working on, and that this report is almost ready, is we're providing an update to our advice from many years ago on DNS blocking. For those of you who don't know what DNS blocking is, it's a mechanism that it used to be ISPs, but now increasingly regulators and governments apply in order to restrict access to not just a domain name, but wide swaths of the internet. Many years ago, when the SSAC issued its report and its advice, the SSAC said things like, this is a bad idea, don't do it. We have since understood that reality does not match wishes, and there are many, many reasons why regulators, governments have a need to block legally or not, block the DNS or pieces of the internet. So we are changing what we're doing. We're focusing this paper, this report on, if you're going to block, here is how to do it responsibly. If you're going to block, here are the unexpected or unintended side effects that you could or you should expect. And we're coming out, we will be coming out with a set of kind of core best practices that say, if you do have to block, here is a responsible, here is the appropriate way to do it, and here are examples of other ways you could do it that are likely to have unexpected and unintended side effects, right? So this report is going to be far more pragmatic. It's aimed at regulators, it's aimed at ISPs, it's aimed at network operators who, in many cases, by law or by subpoena or whatever, have to execute on these actions. And we're trying to provide specific information for them so that they can do precisely what is necessary without going too far and too broad. So that work we expect to publish before the ICANN83 meeting that is coming up in June. So we look forward to getting that going. The last two things that I want to report to you on are, we also are paying attention to the concerns of law enforcement agencies, and especially law enforcement agencies, who are finding that in the ICANN access to registration data model, we're finding that access to data is being restricted. I'm not talking about whether they can find out who is a registrant, who is the admin contact, etc. I'm not talking about the data elements themselves. I'm talking about, if you're a law enforcement agency and you go to a registry or a registrar and you want to find out who owns a domain name, for example, who is a registrar for a domain name, many of these service providers are rate limiting, and in some cases, you're limited to doing no more than 10 requests in a day. Now, if you're a law enforcement agency of a reasonably large country or of a country that is targeted, 10 queries in a day is going to be just not sufficient to do your job. So we're shining a spotlight on that part of the problem, which is access to the systems, not access to the elements, but to the systems themselves, right? So we're turning our eye to that. The last thing that I want to share is, we are in the early stages of thinking about perhaps a 2 or 3 hour workshop at the ICANN84 meeting. I know we just finished ICANN82, but this is kind of the way it goes. But a workshop on blockchain and the interaction of identifiers that utilize the blockchain with the DNS system. Our concern has been, for a long time now, has been that in the blockchain, you have namespaces that are being created. It's an innovation, and we welcome that. But our concern is that those namespaces are being given names like blockchain domain names. They're being called, Web3 resolvers. They're being called, so there's the nomenclature that is known and trusted in the DNS space is being borrowed in the Web3 space. So we want to make sure that there is not consumer confusion, that when there is a failure on, of a quote unquote Web3 resolver, that somebody doesn't, call up the registrar and say, hey, what happened to this? Or they don't call up, the domain registry and say, my Web3 name is lost, right? Because they are separate spaces. So but that's one part of it. But really, what we're trying to do is, as a service to our community, have two parts to this. The first is, what are these things? What do they do? What do they want to do? That's the first part, and try to explain that in very simple, digestible terms. And then the second part is, and why do they want to interact with the DNS, and what is the value add? What are the pitfalls? What should consumers do to protect themselves? Things like that, right? So we're thinking about it. If you think it's a good idea, please talk to me and let me know, and we'll need to gather some support in the community as well for a community session. But just previewing that we're thinking about it. That's the summary, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Ram. That all sounds both interesting and useful work in terms of the SAC, making that sort of very focused analysis available to people. I'm particularly interested in that sort of alt namespace thing. The blockchain domains never stop being mentioned, right? And it must have been an interesting discussion regarding the DNS blocking advice, at least in the early stages of getting people over the emotional feeling of we shouldn't give any guidance because people shouldn't do this. So it's a nice kind of maturing, if you like, of how the community is dealing with that.
Yeah, we're going to some extent from taking a more purist point of view to a much more pragmatist point of view. Blocking is here to stay, whether we like it or not. So let's now focus on how to do it in a way that has the least amount of collateral damage.
Yeah. And a super quick question that came up from Rohan in the chats. Has there been any discussions about DNSSEC's universal adoption? I know that's not something that lends itself to a short answer, but
great question. We're just starting up a work party that is likely to get going in the next few months. At the ICANN83 meeting, you will see a public session on it that will be running, where we're going to be focusing on operational considerations for DNSSEC. It only slightly glances at universal adoption of DNSSEC. We think that it's an important topic. But some in the community have been sitting there questioning whether DNSSEC itself is worthwhile as a protocol. We're not in that camp. We're not at the point of questioning the logic behind DNSSEC. Now, it's a good question to ask. It is not heresy, but such a question, should it be asked, probably is better done inside the IETF than inside of the ICANN.
In terms of universal adoption, or in terms of whether it's the right technology to use?
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the, is the juice worth the squeeze question on DNSSEC.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I know Ron will appreciate that answer as well. Right, let's crack on. Thank you. Ian Sheldon, Government Advisory Committee, give us your readout.
Thanks, Jordan. And I probably got some questions for Ram as well, but maybe we'll see if we've got time for some of that when we circle back at the end of all of our updates. G'day, my name's Ian Sheldon. I'm the Director of Internet Governance here in the Department of Infrastructure, and I'm also the Australian Government's representative to the Governmental Advisory Committee at ICANN. So overall, I think the Governmental Advisory Committee, or the GAC, had a pretty good week in Seattle. We had 75 members and 8 observers in attendance. I think the numbers in the room looked a little down from previous meetings, but I'll confirm that with GAC support staff in due course. The week started with our usual capacity building, this time looking at GLTLDs, or geographic top-level domains. There was a little session on the showcasing the journey of registrants, and we had a session on the next round application support program champions toolkit. So this is a toolkit that we've actually used to help promote locally the support available in applying for the next round of top level domains with ICANN. The GAC is a little concerned about the low completion rates for the applicant support program. Only 2 have been submitted so far, both from the APAC region and both from NGO or charities. So we're keen to ensure that the applicant support program is a success and that the ICANN org's outreach is effective. So things like the Champions Toolkit are great resources to draw upon. The GAC also kicked off an internal process to revise the tenure of our leadership cohort. I raised this because the GAC has a perpetual issue of turnover, and so we're trying to address this by bringing a little bit more stability to our leadership cohort and looking to update some of our operating principles to adjust the term of the chair from 2 terms of 2 years to 3 terms of 2 years, and the vice chairs for 2 terms of 2 years each. We also agreed to shift our election cycle as well, so it lines up with the calendar year and better aligns with other parts of the ICANN community. So these changes need to undergo a 60-day consultation period. So we expect to vote on some of these issues at the Prague meeting. As usual, the GAC also had a number of bilateral meetings with parts of the community, which we always find incredibly valuable and rewarding. We met with, and apologies for the acronym salad I'm about to unleash, but you can dig into some of those in the link or in the communique. But we met with the GNSO, ALAC, CBH, SSAC, NCSG, and the CCNSO. So the last one, the Country Code Name Supporting Organization, you'll hear a little bit from Jordan about what they were up to in this meeting. But our bilateral meeting with them was notable, I think, because I have a new role as the GAC liaison to the CCNSO, and I'm keen to explore new ways for our 2 constituencies to meet and interact. And so the first 30 minutes of that session, we heard from Jordan actually on some of the CCNSO's work on the policy gap analysis process. But the last 60 minutes were spent trying this speed dating approach, where the room was set up with eight stations showcasing a mix of governance and technical arrangements for various CCTLD operators. And then the GAC rotated through each of these 8 stations and had small group discussions on how each of those different operators worked and managed their affairs. So in my liaison role, I'm pretty keen to find new ways for the GAC to learn from the CCNSO. The GAC can always learn from other parts of the community, and I think the CCNSO is a fantastic source of some of that expertise. We also had a pretty good bilateral with the board, and I took the opportunity to reiterate some of the time zone challenges that our region faces in engaging with ICANN calls and meetings, asking the board about the culture that appears to be potentially uncaring about the equality of participation. And I know many on this call who try and get up at 2 and 3 in the morning to take part in these will understand those challenges. My comments followed similar statements from our community, which were made at the How We Meet community session, as well as during the community forum in Istanbul. Even though I think I received a reasonably flat or perhaps unconcerned response from the board, I do think it's important that we continue to raise this issue from our various constituencies, and I very much look forward to coordinating messaging ahead of Prague on this. And finally, as usual, the GAC spent quite a lot of time working through the communique, noting a breadth of issues of importance to the GAC, including DNS abuse, registration data accuracy, urgent requests for data, all of which I know Desiree had also mentioned in her update as touch points with the GNSO. And the GAC also made note of the community code of conduct statement of interest work. So I did want to raise this because the statement of interest piece is one that strikes to the heart of the multi-stakeholder model. And for those who may be new to the space, amendments to the Code of Conduct are looking to make clear that anybody who participates in ICANN processes should be required to disclose interests behind their participation. This is a straight requirement in many other internet communities, and a space that I think ICANN is looking to close. There had been some pushback from some parts of the community on this, which was disappointing. Frankly speaking, if you're unable to disclose whether there is some interest behind your participation, then you should step aside from the policy process. The GAC thinks it's critical that this line is bright and clear. Transparency is vital for this whole multi-stakeholder process to work. So we genuinely hope for a speedy completion of this process, particularly when the multi-stakeholder model is under close scrutiny through processes like the WSIS plus 20 review. Finally, the informal or the inferential analysis of malicious domains report came up quite frequently through our meetings as well, and provided the GAC with a lot of food for thought about next steps for combating DNS abuse. We thought it was a great starting point, and look forward to seeing where that work can go from here. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the latest communique if you're keen to dig into any more of the GAC's positioning on this or any of the other issues as well. And the conclusion of this meeting also marked my commencement as GAC Vice Chair. So the GAC leadership will be meeting next month in Brussels to map out priorities and improvements for operations and take a bit of a strategic view over the next year. Well, I might leave it there, Jordan, but happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian, for that. Again, a busy meeting. There aren't any questions in the pod right now, so I'll rattle through a bit of a CCNSO thing. So if you do have questions, audience, for any of the people who are speaking, pop them in the Q&A pod, and I'll also give you panelists the chance to ask each other questions. So one of the hats I wear is as Vice Chair of the Council of the CCNSO. And I've asked my colleague Mike to paste into the chat a link to the session highlights Google Doc that gives you the rundown of the sessions. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but a few pieces of work that are underway at the moment. One is that there's an ICANN process around how we meet, looking at tweaks and adjustments to the meetings program that the company runs for the community. There are 3 ICANN public meetings each year, big ones, and they cost a lot of money. And in the post-COVID environment, they've been costing a lot more. So this group started a community dialogue group talked with ICANN staff about some ideas they had for ways to tweak that. Those were published, and in the CCNSO, there was a community feedback session so that our reps on that dialogue group could start getting some feedback. There'll be a chance for public comments on that coming up later. The CCNSO is reviewing its financial contribution model. Most country code domain managers are not contracted parties with ICANN. We collaborate with ICANN, and ICANN offers the IANA root zone service, which we all find rather important. And from time to time, we take a look at the voluntary contribution model, the value exchange model, which sees many of us making a financial contribution to ICANN to meet some of the direct and indirect costs of the services we look at. It's meant to have a 5-yearly review. I think we started this one a little late, but it was a community engagement session on that. Our Domain Name Abuse Standing Committee, the DASC, which my colleague and our CEO, Bruce Tonkin, is the vice chair of, had a session that relates to something else other people have already mentioned, which was registration data accuracy in the CC world. While DNS abuse remains low among CC/TLDs, generally speaking, there was an interesting community dialogue about aspects of that data validation, what approaches people take, if any, what benefits they see from that, and how validation might contribute to enhanced accuracy of registration records. There were a couple of other sessions on things like driverless UA readiness. We did have the bilateral with the GAC that Ian has mentioned. And there was a culmination of a piece of work which is called the policy gaps work that the CCNSO has been doing that we've spoken about in the last few meetings. That was kicked off by a case where an organization didn't want to be listed as the CCTLD manager for a CC anymore, but there wasn't an incoming manager. So the country code was left managerless. So what do you do in that situation? Was that a gap in the policy frameworks that explain or set out how IANA should relate to CCTLDs? We've done a bit of a deep dive into issues that IANA faces with that policy framework, gaps they perceive, and the CCTLD community came to a consensus following some work that I led, that the first two steps it wants to take a closer look at there are actually about the IANA public records, the records that IANA keeps for a country code domain manager. What data needs to be collected and displayed. You can find that in the root zone records in the IANA website, IANA.org. Why are they collected? How are they accuracy maintained? And if the manager doesn't maintain those records at an accuracy level, what should be done about that, if anything? So we're going to convene a study group to dig into those questions and analyze whether there needs to be any new policy in that area or not as part of the work, and to just shed some light and shine a light on how the data accuracy is looking, what issues there might be, and perhaps restate things that were just assumed 30 or 40 years ago about what information needs to be displayed in the root zone. And the other one, completely differently, was the question of disaster recovery. CCTLD managers are responsible for business continuity and making sure that plans are in place to deal with any emergencies or interruptions to service from whatever reason, wars, natural disasters, political disputes, and so on. But sometimes their plans don't work. And sometimes then people come to IANA and say, can you help us? And so this will dig into looking at whether there are any such arrangements in place already. What role can or should IANA play, given its very narrow role in the CCTLD business, to support that, or is it something that we should ask them to stay away from? So digging into those questions as well will be the subject of a separate study group. That is a piece of work that started in August and finished in March. So we were able to, by ICANN82 standards, take quite a quick approach to triaging that list. And then the study group should be established in time to have kicked off their work for their meeting in June for ICANN83. So that's my update from the CCNSO. There are lots of other interesting sessions, and you can check them out in that highlights document that's in the chat. Now, let's turn to some questions. We're going to finish at 11:30 sharp, so we've got about 13 minutes to go. There was a question from Holly Raish about any response from IANA. And I don't know exactly what that was referring to, Holly, so if you could give a little bit of a more fulsome question. IANA was involved in that policy gaps work. Kim Davies was there in the dialogues, and the first gaps that we looked at were ones that were raised by IANA. So they've been involved. If that doesn't answer your question, please feel free to restate it. Kai Feher asks, has there been any discussion about obliging registries, any work on privacy policies for GTLDs participating in CZDS? Now, does anyone know what that is and want to try answering that question? I see that Ram is nodding. Do you want to have a go at that one?
It's a centralized zone. It's a way that you can get zone file information about, from GTLDs. They are contractually required to provide their zone files to ICANN, and ICANN in turn provides a clearinghouse function through the CZDS to requesters.
Okay.
But to the question on any work on privacy policies for GTLDs, I'm not aware of it. I'm not paying attention to that topic. Perhaps Desiree may be able to respond to it from a GNSO point of view.
Desiree, do you have anything to add there? And thank you, Ram. Desiree, if you are answering, you are on mute.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, there is some ongoing work with respect to the privacy, and I think there is a privacy and proxy services accreditation implementation. It's a program that will replace the registry accreditation agreement. So there are some aspects of privacy. As you know, proxy services were introduced back in 2013, which means that a registrant can use a proxy if they wish to remain private. However, with the new regulation, I think it's also good to note that businesses are required to have their data public and not the individuals. I hope that clarifies your question. But I'll include the link to the PPSSI working group and the process.
Thanks, Desiree and Ram, for that answer. And Carl sort of says, to be clear, the registrar proxy services are not at all related to CZDS. Registries are allowed to ask for PII as part of CZDS, but they do not have any policy docs at the moment. That sounds like something perhaps to follow up directly, Carl, with Ram or with Desiree. But thanks for asking the question. Dear panelists, do any of you have questions for any others of you? Or any brief sort of closing remarks that you would like to make? Ram does, yeah, go ahead.
Jordan, I was so pleased that we're finally at this ICANN82 meeting. The whole pilot holistic review and the mess around it is starting to get resolved, or at least, I don't know about it being resolved. At least the current mess that is in, that train has been stopped. And we had to figure out how to get, the new train started. But, this was kind of a classic example of a community effort that got wound up really fast, and then it wandered off base and scope and all of those things. And we were once again at risk of really burning our valuable community members' time and effort and energy. So I was really pleased that the chairs of that holistic review, stood up and said, "This is not fit for purpose. Let's stop this."
And I'll just echo that, Ram, and add that it's the way that was resolved in part was an impromptu gathering of SOAC chairs and the chairs of the ATRT review, which generated that call for that pilot holistic approach and so on. And that's one of the advantages of actually having in-person meetings, that you can get together and nut things out complicatedly on short notice, when otherwise you might be spinning in Zoom land for a considerable period of time. And Cheryl, I believe, might have a comment on a related topic.
Strangely enough, I do. It's an absolutely perfect example of why being able to gather and not only gather, have the opportunity to do these sidebar meetings is vitally important. And we can't lose sight of what is a very difficult thing to, look at as a return on investment. But it is simply the smartest thing that some of us can do from time to time. And that is just allow everybody in a room, new baseline, let's see if we can all help each other understand the perspectives. And that really does need a face-to-face aspect. Maybe hybrid, perhaps, but certainly that being in the room and being able to have a frank and fearless conversation. I think that's the other thing as well. It's not an on-stage presentation style. It's a bit of a argy-bargy, but it certainly worked. And both Pat, my co-chair on a few of these things, like Accountability and Transparency Review Team number 3, which kind of kicked all of this off, and I remain available to any and all to help answer clarifying questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. And Ian, I believe that your hand is up too.
Thanks, John. I mean, I just wanted to draw the conversation back to kind of the how we meet piece as well. You know, really underscoring. I think the fact that our region really punches above its weight in ICANN processes, but a lot of the challenges that we face don't seem to be as well received by the planners or taken in consideration when we talk about how we meet, how we work, how ICANN conducts its business. So I think the conversation we just had on the CPH and those broader pieces and the value of meeting face to face, really, I'd encourage people on this call to think about how we can better articulate our needs from our region as ICANN rethinks how it does its work. I think it's easy for other regions to jump on a call during business hours, or maybe meet in their region themselves. But it's a long way for us to go, and we certainly make the most of it. So I think when we're looking at cutting back some of those face-to-face meetings or changing the way we work, I think we need to make sure that our views and concerns are felt and appreciated. And finally, just a brief comment to Ram. Thanks again for your update. I think all of those things you just mentioned in your piece are going to be of key interest to the GAC. I know Prague is going to be quite a short meeting, but I think the GAC would be keen to hear about some of those developments. So let's see if we can square away a little bit of time for that bilat between our two constituencies and dig a little bit deeper. Because I think the work that's upcoming is it's important, but it's not deeply or confusingly technical. I think you've picked it up in a really interesting way that makes it accessible and understandable. And from my perspective, that's kind of exactly the space that the GAC needs to lean in a little bit more on and be comfortable having those conversations on. So thanks again. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. Actually, I'm going to mention two other things. This was the first meeting with Curtis Lindquist as the new chief executive and president of ICANN. And so it's going to be interesting for us all to see how he flows into his leadership role there. And in our country code community, we had a change in directors with Byron Holland, the president and CEO of CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, auDA's peer organization in Canada, joining the board to be one of the two country code domain related directors. So that was nice to see as well. Look, we're on the time, so I'm going to sort of close us out today by firstly thanking you all very much. All of you who attended, participated, asked questions, but particularly our panel, most of whom have only recently gotten back after the journey too far away, Seattle, Washington, United States. To all of you, if you're not already, please consider joining auDA as a .au member to stay up to date and involved in the Australian internet community. Sign up via our website. It's free. There are no onerous terms and conditions with that process. Keep an eye on our website and social media channels for upcoming events. And as usual, we'll put up a recording of this webinar and send around an email with the link to that once it's posted. And auDA will also do a bit of a summary of the conversation in a blog post, which will be published in the next week or two as well. We'll probably send that out along with the link to the video once both are ready. So whatever time of day or night it is for you, or whenever you are watching this, thank you from all of us who presented this webinar, and have a lovely afternoon, morning, evening, whatever it is. See you next time.